1 year ago, Archbishop of New York, Timothy Cardinal Dolan, asked a judge to serve as a special counsel and independent investigator to review how the Archdiocese of New York has responded to the church's sex abuse crisis. Today, the judge is scheduled to discuss her findings at a press conference. We have a crew there. Let's listen in.
Including clergy, and our outreach to help victims and their families, including the Independent Reconciliation and Compensation Program. The challenge, you might recall, I observed back then, was that people doubted the effectiveness and they doubted those very assurances. And they wondered if the church was keeping its word. So, what to do? I introduced Judge Barbara Jones, a highly respected federal judge, and I asked her if she would undertake a thorough review of all of our files, our protocols, our programs and procedures, and let me and the wider community know if we were doing what we had promised. Well, it's been a year, and she's ready to reply, and I thank all of you for coming to hear her. I'm as eager as you are to hear what she has to say. Judge Jones, please.
Thank you, Cardinal Dolan. I know that everybody here has received a summary copy of my findings and recommendations, but what I'd like to do now is take the opportunity to give you more background and more detail. Yes, the Cardinal did ask me to review the Archdiocese compliance with the policies and procedures from the Dallas Charter in 2002. But the real focus here was on the safety of children in the Archdiocese today, prevention. So among the first tasks that I chose to do was to just get to it and review the personnel files for every priest and deacon in active service in this Archdiocese. My team and I, after a very long and lengthy piece of work with that review, are able to determine or to confirm no archdiocesan priest or deacon with a substantiated allegation of abuse of a minor remains in ministry today in this Archdiocese. Now, from this review, I did discover that the Office of Priest Personnel, which is where all of these files are housed, while it functions well, would benefit greatly from less reliance on paper and the ability to rely on enhanced technology. I mentioned that it was a lengthy review that we did, and I meant in time as well as in work, and a lot of that was because of the lack of enhanced technology. So I have recommended a new document management system to assist in the really crucial work of the Office of Priest Personnel. I know this doesn't sound very exciting as recommendations go, but I have to tell you that it's essential if this office is going to continue to work quickly and efficiently. The Archdiocese, the Chancery, has already signed a contract for a new document management system, and not just for the Office of Priest Personnel, although that will be the first office where the module is implemented, but for the entire Archdiocese. I think this will be a tremendous help in terms of reviewing future compliance. Let me go now to what the Cardinal mentioned. He discussed briefly a year ago, which was responding, following the rules of the Dallas Charter in responding to abuse complaints. So after the review of the personnel files, I did just that. I reviewed all of the norms, the laws, the requirements of the Dallas Charter, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. What I will say is that I'm sure all of you know it was accepted or adopted by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops in 2002, and it has a detailed process for how a diocese has to handle a complaint of sexual abuse of a minor today. Before I get into that, and I will say that the Archdiocese is following the mandates of the Dallas Charter, and in some instances have gone beyond its requirements. But before I get into that, I'd like to give you some background to help you understand what the process is by describing what the caseload is that's coming in that needs to be reviewed under the terms of the Dallas Charter. So from the outset, it's very important to note that almost all of the complaints received over the last several years are not complaints of current conduct, but rather they are complaints about conduct which occurred in sometimes decades earlier. Most of these complaints also involve priests who are deceased. In the Archdiocese of New York, there have only been 2 substantiated complaints of sexual abuse of a minor by archdiocesan priests where the abuse occurred after 2002. All of that being said, as I mentioned already, the Archdiocese follows strict protocols in every one of the cases that comes to it, every time it receives an allegation of sexual abuse of a minor, no matter how long ago the alleged abuse occurred. And that triggers, that report always triggers an immediate report to the relevant district attorney's office. As you might imagine, from what I've said, the district attorney is almost always unable to move forward after he or she receives the complaint because of the age of the allegation, being beyond the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution. However, in every case, once the district attorney has finished his or her review, the Archdiocese does its own investigation. It commissions an independent investigation of the complaint by an outside independent investigation firm. Once that investigation is concluded, the results are presented to a lay review board. This is also part of the Dallas Charter protocol. That review board is comprised of lawyers, judges, parents, a psychiatrist, and clergy. And they decide, after listening and sometimes hearing from the accuser and the accused, all of the evidence, whether they believe the claim is substantiated. The standard for substantiating a claim is the civil standard. It's by a preponderance of the evidence. And so the board decides whether it is more likely than not that the abuse was committed and that the accused is responsible. When the board makes that decision that an accused priest has abused a minor, that advice is given to Cardinal Dolan, that verdict, if you will. Cardinal Dolan always accepts the lay review board's decision in every case. And if the board says the complaint is substantiated, that priest is permanently removed from ministry. I have found, having gone through each part of this process, interviewing the district attorneys, meeting with the lay review board, talking with independent investigative teams and others, that this process for responding to abuse complaints is working very well. I want to go back to the district attorneys for a minute because they were particularly helpful in their conversations with us and very appreciative and approving of the dialogue that the Archdiocese has with them when a complaint occurs. This won't surprise you. As with the priest personnel office, I've also found that this process, while it's adhered to, as I've just mentioned, would benefit from the use of technology, once again, to track and monitor every complaint from start to finish. And I've recommended an electronic case management system, which is actually now up and running. And according to the users, it's helpful. I guess, though, I'd just like to end by saying, at least in this area, the key here is that every complaint is investigated, and no priest with a substantiated allegation of abuse of a minor remains in ministry. And that's what I've found. It's very important now to recognize the victim survivors, the mandates of the Dallas Charter with respect to victim survivors, and what this Archdiocese does. The Archdiocese, as required by the Dallas Charter, has a Victims Assistance Coordinator. And I've interviewed the Victims Assistance Coordinator and reviewed her work. She is responsible for victim support and outreach. The Victim Assistance Coordinator is frequently the person who receives the calls from a victim alleging sexual abuse, and part of her role is to give comfort during that conversation, but also to offer the victim counseling by a provider of the victim survivor's choice, and the expenses for that are covered by the Archdiocese and have been since the Dallas Charter. This Archdiocese has also implemented the Independent Reconciliation and Compensation Program, and that was done in 2016. The purpose of it is to financially compensate victim survivors of abuse. That IRCP, the Reconciliation and Compensation Program, is independently administered by Kenneth Feinberg and Camille Buros. And I'm sure most of you know Kenneth Feinberg's history and success at running such compensation programs. The important thing to know here is that the IRCP receives claims, collects its own evidence, and independently determines whether a claim is eligible for compensation, and if it is, how much compensation is appropriate. The Archdiocese pays every claim that the IRCP determines to be eligible at the amount recommended by the administrators. And to date, the IRCP has paid more than $67 million to victim survivors. My opinion with respect to the IRCP is that it is a highly effective program. It has provided expedited relief to victim survivors who have been able to go in to the IRCP, to Ken Feinberg and Camille Buros, and receive a monetary award without the need for litigation, which can be lengthy, and I think with much less stress than might be caused by a litigation process. I've recommended that the Archdiocese continue to accept new claims through the IRCP, but frankly, they have been doing that, and they didn't need that recommendation. Those claims are still being accepted. The focus here, the Cardinal's focus, is, as I mentioned, on the safety of children today. The key to that is the Safe Environment Program, which was also a part of the Dallas Charter. Its whole focus is to keep children safe in parishes, schools, religious education programs, CYO, anywhere that children come into contact with adults through the church. The Safe Environment, I've looked at the Safe Environment's policies and codes. They have a code of conduct in particular, which requires criminal background checks as well as training for anyone in the Archdiocese who comes into contact with children. This training covers appropriate boundaries with children, how to identify signs that a child is being abused, strategies that predators use to get close to their victims, and what to do if you suspect a child is being abused. I took the Safe Environment training, and I thought it was very effective and fulfilled those goals. That office also offers annual age-appropriate lesson plans for children in the schools on these topics. And I shouldn't just say in the schools, it's also for all the children who come into contact with the Archdiocese. I think I've already said this, but I find the safe environment policies, environment office's policies and procedures to be effective. As I've mentioned in other areas, however, this office could also be improved with technology. And I've recommended here an updated database to make data entry and compliance tracking easier. More cooperation from parishes and programs is also needed to maintain up-to-date information on many employees and volunteers who work with children across the Archdiocese. The Safe Environment Office is working long and hard to maintain the database they have and to make sure that background checks are being done when they should be, and training is being done when it should be. However, an updated database will help communication and information flow, as I said, between the parishes and the other organizations. And this is vital in terms of safety of children. It is prevention, which is the all-important thing. I think right now, safe environment training is provided once an employee comes on the job. I've suggested, recommended that it be done more frequently and on an annual basis if possible. I don't think you can get too much training, especially if you keep it updated. The general efficacy of this program is going to remain a sharp focus of my review going forward, and I hope it to be a priority for the Archdiocese. So as the Cardinal told you, I have been at this now for a year. I think you can tell from what I've just said that I've found strict adherence to the mandates of the Dallas Charter. There is certainly a commitment in the Archdiocese, throughout this Archdiocese, and its leadership to maintain a safe environment for children. As I've mentioned, though, I have found many areas will be assisted by the addition of technology, and I've recommended some additional enhancements. I should say that for the past year, every step of the way, I have found the Archdiocese and its leadership to be cooperative, very willing to accept my recommendations. I am encouraged by what I've seen, and I have confidence that the Archdiocese will continue in the commitment that it has and has demonstrated thus far to the safety of children. So that's it. Thank you.
Judge, can I just ask,
Sure.
how many personnel files did you review?
Oh, I don't have the exact number, but easily a couple of thousand.
Did you have anything further to say, Your Eminence, or just the questions?
Thank you.
Okay. So if you could just identify yourself when I call on you, so that, and who your question is directed to, Lauren?
Hi, Judge, I'm wondering about the technology you recommended, enhanced technology. Is it in addition to hard copy, or is it instead of, like no secret files anywhere that can be rated or, in
Let me put it this way. Any and every piece of paper will be put in the case management, in the database management system. That's where you will find everything you need to know on the topic. Is that,
Right, I just want to make sure that, because you were saying the paper issue was a problem, because we've been hearing about the secret files someplace. So is the database instead of it, or you're still going to have hard copy to check it on?
well, I'm assuming all the hard copy will be entered into the database. I don't know that, I doubt it will be destroyed, but it will be important that it all goes into the database so that it can be searched and used for all sorts of purposes.
Steve?
Hi, Steve Burns, CBS 880. I see one of your recommendations is for the Archdiocese to hire a person whose sole responsibility is to oversee sexual abuse complaints, but you also said the process, the protocols they have today do work well. So where's the gap that warrants that
Right.
recommendation?
At the moment, there's not really a gap. I'm looking to the future. The two persons responsible for running this program have been doing it for 15 years. Each of them has significant responsibilities in the General Counsel's office and in Safe Environment. This person would come in, would take some of the administrative burdens off of them. I would expect both of them to remain as a consulting body for the program.
Juliet?
Yes, the lay committee that reviews the cases and investigates, did you look at their process, how they investigate?
Yes. Well, I looked at two things. I looked at the investigative process itself, and I encouraged some enhanced, if you call them enhanced, investigative techniques there. I think more interviews, in-person interviews, if possible, visiting locations with respect to where events may or may not have occurred, tightening up and actually doing more in some cases to try to find out what happened. So that's the investigative process. Everything that the investigators come up with, and let me give you a little idea of how the board works. As investigative results come in, maybe it's an interview that's signed by the person interviewed. It might be a tape recording if the person who's being interviewed agrees to have their interview taped. It comes into the lay review board as it's being done so that they can review information, evidence as it comes in. At the point where a decision is made that the investigation is completed, then a booklet is compiled for the lay review board. They are given time to review it, and they meet at that meeting. They decide whether or not the case has been substantiated. Typically, the chief investigator on the case will give them an unbiased narrative of what the investigative results are. At that point, some cases, the accused and or the accuser wish to come in and speak to the board. They're welcome. If the accused asks to speak to the board, the accuser is always advised of that and invited to attend, and vice versa. With all of the information from the investigation, as well as their own reactions and assessment of the witnesses, they then deliberate privately without anyone else there, and they reach a conclusion as to whether or not one or more of the offenses charged have been proven by a preponderance.
Do you feel confident in that it is professionally done, that these are investigators that are seasoned or experienced in the process of investigation?
I will say that that was one area where I felt very confident when I looked at the investigators. After years of doing investigations, I was very pleased. The particular investigative group we have now are some former federal agents, although I always think New York City detectives are the best. But the bottom line is I think they have a couple of those. They're good. They're very good. And they are anxious to get to the bottom of things. I've been very pleased.
Olivia?
Cardinal Dolan, how do you feel about these findings?
Well, I feel like an 8th grade boy that was waiting for a Sister Gemma to come out and let me know how I did in my exam. Because the last year, I've watched in admiration as Judge Jones and her excellent staff have been indefatigable in searching. And I've just wondered. I said, look, I went out on a limb and told the press and told my people and told my priests, everything is open, and I've asked them to be not to leave a paper unread, and I've held my breath. And now I'm very grateful and very relieved. Thank you, Judge. You've also given us stuff to work on, and I would hope that you would be available to make sure that we're doing what you have recommended. But no, I feel very relieved and very grateful. Thanks for asking. And I just hope you remember from last year, because most of you were here, I'm trying my best to serve my people. I love them, and my main job is to serve them as their pastor. And it stung deeply last year when I heard from some of my people, you know, Cardinal Dolan, we're having trouble trusting you bishops. And I just thought, how can I restore their confidence? And I think, Judge, thank you. What you have said and what you intend to share with the people as well has gone a long way to do that. I hope so.
I have a question, Cardinal Dolan. I just want to ask you, because you mentioned trust, and what do you say to victim survivors who do have a hard time, frankly, trusting anything that the church has to say? What do you say to them now?
Well, sometimes you can't say much. Sometimes all you can do is listen. One thing that helps immensely would be the number of victim survivors and their families who would tell me thanks. We still have a deep wound that we don't know if it's ever going to heal, and we're probably never going to be able to get over some negative feelings and anger towards the church. But thank you for listening to us. Thank you for taking us seriously. Thank you for trying your best to offer some understanding and some sense of resolution. And thank you for making sure that what happened in the church a long time ago is not happening anymore. Sorry.
Cardinal, I wanted to ask you, the IRCP has paid out $67 million to victims. How much did that save the Archdiocese in just litigation costs if they had decided to litigate?
I'm not sure, Lauren. It's a fair question. I don't know, because right now the Child Victims Act is just clicking in, and we're unaware of the financial impact that's going to have upon the Archdiocese. So it's probably it would be a little too sanguine for us to try to estimate that now. We'd probably be able to give you a more precise answer in the future.
Frank Esposito, Journal News. I'll sort of follow up to that. So you're still open up the IRCP. So how do you funnel people with CVA cases into the program?
It's really not our decision. It would be the victim's decision. Some continue to go to the IRCP. We're grateful that some attorneys are directing them there. As the judge mentioned, some of the attorneys are saying it'll be much more expeditious and less stressful, but you certainly have the right to go civilly, and many are doing that. So probably not as many as prior to the CVA, but it's still up and running. I was glad the judge recommended that we keep it up and running. I was even happier that we had already made that decision. So.
More?
Cardinal Dolan, will the Archdiocese implement mandatory reporting to law enforcement the second an allegation is made moving forward?
Already done it, Judge. Would your findings be that for the last 20 years that's happened?
That's right.
So thanks. Yeah.
All right, report that.
Thank you.
Just ask how long you've personally known Judge Jones?
Since she walked into the room a year ago, about as long as you all have known her.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, folks.
Just one last question about the IRCP. If the recommendations by that board.
Our lay board, you mean?
Right. Do they have to clear the judgment or the claim amount that they deal with the district attorney or anybody else? It's just simply your board and they make the decision?
They would make the decision. The IRCP people are bound like we are. If they have someone come in with an allegation, they immediately have to turn it over to the DA, the same way we do. Thanks, folks. Glad you were here. Stay tuned.
Thanks.
We've just been listening to a press conference held by Archbishop of New York, Timothy Cardinal Dolan. A year ago, Dolan asked Judge Barbara Jones to serve as an independent special counsel and to, quote, do a comprehensive and exhaustive study of the policies, procedures, and protocols of the Archdiocese in its response to allegations of abuse of a young person by a priest, deacon, or bishop of the Archdiocese. The Archbishop also asked the judge to help come up with a new way for the church here in New York to deal with the issues. We will have more on the judge's findings on CBS and New York later today, as well as on CBS 2 News and on CBSNewYork.com.